Good day, everybody. Today we are going to get into Chapter 9 as we continue our looking at purchases. We're going to jump from one big purchase of buying a car to another big purchase of buying a home. So hopefully your house has two purposes. Not only can it give you somewhere to live, but also something that can appreciate and increase in value that you can use to save up as a nest egg. So we're going to look at your different options for renting, for obtaining a house. We're going to look at how you're going to be evaluated in order to get a mortgage. We're going to look at the calculation of that mortgage. We're going to talk about the inspection, etc. So you got to look at what's the advantages of renting, what's the advantage of owning your own home. You know, with renting, it's very easy to get out of it. My wife moved like 13 times before we got married. Jumped from apartment building to apartment building. Very easy to do. You're in a house, a little more difficult. You're not getting any equity. Your money's just going away to somebody else. So you get to store that equity. You get to have ownership of something. You get to choose what you do with your house. That pride of having a nice house and taking care of it. You could get into the tax benefits of mortgage interest and real estate taxes, though that's going to be a little more difficult now that itemizing is going to be much more difficult in the future. The downside of this, well, you've got the annual costs as far as tied with a house, insurance, property taxes, making all the utility payments. You obviously are going to have to carry a significant amount of debt to purchase a house. That's going to affect your liquidity and affect your mobility. Because if you want to move, it's going to take a little bit of time to get rid of that house. So you got to look into what are all the features that you want. And then that has to come to a realistic discussion of what do you need. I'm not a big fan of the HGTV type housing shows, but the one thing I do like in one of them is that they ask people what are all their dream attributes. They take them to that house and then give them the reality check of what that actually costs, which is generally a lot more than that person wants to spend. So what do we need to obtain in this house? So as far as bedrooms, bathrooms, once again, depends upon the size of your family and what you expect the size of your family to be in the near future. What are your needs for parking? What are your needs for storage? Disability accommodation. I have cerebral palsy. Everything in my house is on one floor. For the most part, with the exception of a basement, because I don't want to go up in steps all day long. And that's what I need. Privacy. Depending upon the area that you're located in, or if you want to get a farm out away from everybody. Energy efficiency. What's it look like? Well, how close is it to your work, to schools, to stores, to people you want to visit with? All these things have to go into you choosing what your house is going to be. So we've got the different types of homes. Do you want a condo? Do you want a mobile home? A single unit dwelling? A big multiple unit dwelling? You've got all kinds of different types of houses with different looks that you can find. And then going back to banking, we're not going to be paying cash for a home. You know, Dave Ramsey's a big personal finance guru, and he thinks you should save up and pay cash for everything. Well, there's some things we're not going to be able to save enough cash to buy an entire house. So this is one thing that we're going to need to obtain some debt to be able to get. So once again, we're going to look at our credit scores. And that's going to be factored in. The banker's going to want to see our tax return from the last 2-3 years. They're going to want to know our credit score and our credit history. and how well we pay our debts, how much debt we have out currently, how much money we're making, what kind of a down payment we want to have. So all these factors are going to go into deciding whether we can afford to pay the banker back for our house. And they give us a little chart within our textbook that goes in and shows the calculating of deciding how much home can we afford. And you can see all the factors that go into that. And there's a bunch of different calculators that you can find online that compare renting and owning and what is the best decision for you. There's going to have to be an inspection. So you're going to have to hire somebody, and depending upon where you're living, pay them probably at least $600 to do an inspection and make sure the house is okay. And if it's not, what things need to be fixed? Do they got to be fixed by the current owner, or do they got to be fixed by you? And you got to look at all those things and what kind of shape the property is in. I'm not going to pretend to have an expertise in all this stuff. I got people to look at it and tell me about it. So we can put all these different things together, decide what kind of house do we want to buy, how are we going to obtain it, what features does that house have, what kind of shape is it in. And of course, we got to talk to the banker about the affording part. And look at what's going on in the housing market. How many houses are available? What kind of shape they're in can judge how much time you're going to have. Here in Mayville, Portland, if something comes on the market that's in fairly good shape, guess what? It's not going to be on the market for long. Somebody's going to snatch it up. So you won't have a lot of time to dilly-dally. Factor in what can you afford as a down payment and what effect is that going to have on your various costs. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into what your mortgage payment is going to be. We're going to look at the total cost of that mortgage. We're going to talk about closing costs. So more than likely, this is going to be the most significant debt that you have in your life, is going to be this house. Because you're going to have it for anywhere from 15 to 30 years. And you have to make those payments, or the bank's going to take it back, and you're going to have nowhere to live. So you got to make sure you purchase something that is affordable to you so you don't miss those payments. So your total cost that's going to go into this house is going to be affected by how much of a down payment that you have. Because then the amount that you borrow is going to be the difference between the total price and what your down payment is. The larger down payment you can put, the lower your mortgage is going to be, because you got less debt to pay back, and you may have less other costs like mortgage insurance that you then no longer have to get, which can affect your month-to-month cash flow. So here's from our textbook. They went through and calculated the mortgage payment under a few different scenarios. So you can see comparing a $250,000 house depending upon how much of a down payment that we have. So you can see at only 5% down, just our debt payment is going to be almost $1,000. And you can see the more the down payment, the lower our debt repayment gets, all the way down to if we theoretically put half down, which really isn't going to happen unless we're selling another house before getting into this one. So like I said, we've got other costs. We've got private mortgage insurance. We've got closing costs. We may have to do some fixer-upper stuff. All that's got to be factored in to our decision. So that monthly payment is going to be our continuous cash obligation that has to fit into our budget. That becomes a line item in our budget. That's a cash flow that's coming out of our checkbook each month. So we have to make those payments. If we're doing a fixed rate mortgage, then we're going to have an annuity. They're going to set it up so we're making the same payment every month. And what's going to change within that payment is just how much is going to principal and how much is going to interest. So that as the more payments you make, more is going to be going to principal, and that principal amount, that debt, is going to get smaller. So you can see here, if we've got a $200,000 loan, we've got it set up so our payment is $1,264 a month, basically. And you can see after each payment, the amount that's going to interest is decreasing. The amount that's going to principal is increasing ever so slightly. And that's then decreasing the amount that we still owe on the loan. But you can see here, 1 year's worth of payments, we've only paid off about $5,300. And you've made about $14,000 of payments. So $9,000 went to interest that first year, $5,000 went to principal. So that's what's going to be like a lot in the first few years of your mortgage, is you're going to be spending a lot of money on interest and a lot of money on other things, and not as much as actually going against the debt that you owe. Which is mean the longer that this is spread out, the more that you're going to be paying, and you're going to pay for your house multiple times over the longer you spread this out. So we can do some calculations as far as estimating what our monthly payment is under the amount of the cost. And you can see those for a couple options. But really, I'll show you a mortgage calculator that you can use to do this. So we've got a bunch of different ways to structure the home loan. I say talk to your banker, see Tom Moe's real estate classes for more information on this. The big thing here, you could have fixed rate, you could have an adjustable rate mortgage, which you'll probably get a lower rate in the front end, but as inflation, as the economy changes and interest rate goes up, guess what? Your interest rate's going to go up. So what's better for you over the long term, especially is this going to be over 30 years, to know what your rate's going to be or to be subject to an adjustment? Say right now, better to be tied into a fixed rate because interest is going to continue to climb in the next few years. And then you can get into home equity loans or lines of credit as you get some payments against principal and then want to take out additional mortgages essentially to make changes to the home. You also may have to have points factored in, which is essentially prepaid interest that will go into your mortgage payment or go into the closing process. So you may have to pay some in advance to get a lower rate. And you can see the effect of there if you paid a couple of points in the front end at a little bit of a higher rate here. You can see that affects what your payment is going to be. And then you're going to have closing costs. So these are all the stuff that happens at the end. When you meet with your real estate agent, when you meet with the lawyer, that you have taken care of all the paperwork at the end of the mortgage process when you officially buy the home. So you're going to have an appraisal on the house. That's going to cost you anywhere from $400, $500, $600 up to a couple grand. Depending upon where you are, they're going to have to do all the formal things to make sure that the title is free and clear and you can buy the house. Any insurance on against that, you're going to have paperwork and filing fees to get it into your name and your bank's name. And then, of course, to pay the real estate agent and to pay the lawyer for doing all this. So this can be significant depending upon where you are. My tiny little house here in Mayville, North Dakota, this wasn't too bad, but I've seen stuff from $300,000 houses in Fargo where this is anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 for these closing costs. And they're just stuck in there. And if you continue to buy and sell your house every few years, gosh, you're going to waste a lot of money on these closing costs every time you sell or purchase a home, because you're going to have these in there. So you can pay some points and pay some extra interest up front to lower your monthly payment. Look at where you're either going to go a fixed or variable rate mortgage. And it's probably easier to have fixed and know what your monthly payment is always going to be. And then at the end, you're going to have a bunch of closing costs that, depending upon the cost of the house, are going to be significant, because a lot of them are based on, at least like with the real estate agent's fee, it's a percentage of the price. So the more expensive home you're buying, the larger chunk that you are paying then in commission. So let's look at what goes into financing. Well, when you're buying or selling a house, we got the legal description, we've got details on the mortgage, the sales price, what your deposit's going to be, what your closing date, and what all that's going to be in. You're going to have, like I said, have to go through that home inspection. And you're going to have to figure out who's covering it insurance-wise until that closing date, and you take ownership of it. You may have to make capital expenditures and improve your house. And look at that pretty little house that they put in here in the PowerPoint. So whether repairs or renovation that you got to get factored in, and whether the bank is going to allow you to have that in the initial mortgage. I know when I was looking at buying my home, they said, no, we're not going to factor that in. So if I want to do repairs or renovations now, 5 years later, I could probably factor that into my mortgage and refinance and do that now. So you could look at that refinancing, especially if there's a big change in interest rates. You know, it used to be 10 years ago, rates were really high. Then we had the mortgage crisis, the economic crisis, and interest rates have really gone down, that you're not paying too bad. But there was a time and place where people were paying 17, 20%. Well, if rates are gone down, then it's in your best interest to refinance and lower your payments. And then also factor in trying to pay off early. So if you do have it spread over 30 years, put some extra to principal. It'll lower your total costs in the long run. And please try to avoid going into default and getting evicted and getting foreclosed on and all that stuff. So like I said earlier, don't miss a payment. And this is part of the things when we're talking about budgeting and saving. Maybe one of your goals is improving your home. So you can factor that into your budget and saving to do your home improvements so you don't have to refinance or you don't have to take out a home equity loan to make those capital expenditures. But you got to make sure you understand all the details that are in your mortgage. Going back to that mortgage crisis, a lot of these mortgage companies were doing a bunch of dishonest things and giving mortgages to people they knew dang well could not afford them. They weren't worrying about it because they were just going to sell the mortgage to somebody else and it was going to be somebody else's problem, and it threw our economy into the crapper. But hey, you're putting your pencil to paper, you're putting your name on the dotted line. Be understanding of what you're signing and what mortgage you're getting into. So looking at the payments, I put a link into your questions in Moodle with a mortgage calculator. So for example, let's say you were bought a home for $150,000 and you were lucky enough to make a $10,000 down payment. So your principal would then be $140,000. So that would be your loan that you're going to pay off over 5 years. And let's say we did a 30-year mortgage. You've got a couple grand in property taxes, you've got a grand in home insurance, and you've got some PMI. So with all those factors in, your payment would be about $1,100 a month. And eventually, when that mortgage insurance runs out and you've got enough principal paid off, you would get a payment where that is not included in. You'd be down another $60 a month. But over the course of time here, you're going to be paying $130,000 in interest on a $150,000 house. If you're factoring in all those other payments as far as for your home insurance, for your property taxes over those 30 years, you're going to pay almost $400,000 for a $150,000 house. So look at trying to get this down to the smallest period possible. So there I got $130,000 interest. What if I change my term down to 15 years? By using half the term, my interest is less than half of what it was before. Now I'm only paying $60,000 in interest, and my total payments would be about $252,000 as opposed to almost $400,000. For a monthly payment of about $1,500 a month. So for another $400 a month, I can save myself $60,000. So this is some of the analysis, if you haven't purchased a home yet, I want you to do when you're factoring in that payment. So yes, it's more affordable to go over 30 years, but in the long run, it's going to be better for you to try to do a shorter payment. So we'll do an exercise where we have you playing with this calculator and thinking about how much you want to pay for a house and imagining what that payment's going to be. And then don't forget to factor in these other things because they're more than likely going to get included in your mortgage. Is that PMI, your property taxes that have to be paid every year, and your home insurance that has to be paid every year. So those are additional costs in addition to what they showed you in the textbook and what was just the debt payment, just what you were paying back to principal. And you can fiddle with a bunch of different things. Here it's guessing 5% interest, but even down here, rates are at about 4.5. I think I'm in mine for about 3.5. Just for a comparison, here they tell us 375 by this company. But we'll have to see the fine print when walking through that process. So that is a bunch of things to think about with buying a home.